Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Bits and Bytes. Today I have a very special guest here, Cary Millsap, who is like one of my personal heroes in the Oracle world. I've learned a lot from his blogs when I first got to Oracle technology. And today he's here with us to share just a bit about his history and the world of performance, what it looked like and where he is. So welcome very much to the show, Cary. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you.
So, Carrie, as I just said, it's like I actually, you probably don't know this, but I actually grew up with, like the Tom Kite blog, the Richard Foot blog, who was the other chap? Jonathan Lewis blog, and your blog when I got into performance tuning for Oracle database back in 2002, 3. I learned a lot from all these blogs, from all the information you put out there. I still remember you once posted a picture of a napkin where you explained, I think, your son how to measure
Mhm.
performance. That
Yeah.
somehow got stuck. And like I thought maybe today we can take a little bit of time and you can tell us like what the world of performance diagnostic looked like. You have been with Oracle in I think the 90s. You're back at Oracle now. You've had Method R and other companies in the meantime. And just tell us, where did you start? How did Cary Millsap happen to be the performance guru?
Well, I'll go all the way back to the very beginning when uh, when I went to graduate school for my master's degree in computer science. I took a role at United Technologies Microelectronics Center, where I was a compiler designer guy. And that was my background. I was a software developer, and language design and compilers to implement those languages was specifically what I really loved. And I'd planned to get a PhD, but I noticed the guy in the same room that I worked in the corner had a PhD, and he wasn't doing anything any more fun than what I was doing. So I thought, a PhD may not be worth, the time that I'd have to put in. So I decided, you know what I'll do? I'll go get an MBA instead. I'll get
Mhm.
a 1 year degree in case I'm ever managing people or in case I ever have to deal with money or something like that. At least I'll have gone to school and I'll know something about it. So I went to a 1 year MBA program that was just the hardest educational experience of my life. But when I graduated from that, I got an interview with a company I'd never heard of before called Oracle. And so I went and visited with a gentleman that isn't at Oracle anymore, but his name was Tom Wilkerson. And Tom hired about 5 or 6 people right at the same time as he hired me. One interview, and I was a consultant to Oracle. And I think what everybody thought was, here's this kid that's been through a computer science, and I had a math background before the computer science master's. And he went and got an MBA. So he must hate computer science and he wants to be like a salesman or something now. I was like, well, that's not exactly, the right way to go about categorizing or characterizing me. I didn't identify that way. But I ended up being in a financial consulting group inside Oracle. So all the other guys in my group are like accountants, and they're just eating up, the Oracle General Ledger and Oracle Fixed Assets and Oracle payables and receivables, and all that was the interesting app to them. Well, to me, the interesting app was the database. And luckily, I guess there were enough problems with the database back then that I think the reason Tom hired me was because one of the installation steps in the product in the financials with the database underneath it is you have to create, or in the old days you had to create this special file that gave like the character mappings to allow printers to go to boldface or italics or big print, small print. So all these control sequences. And I think that Tom thought, well, since this guy's got a computer science degree, he can like make those mapping files and the control sequences and stuff, the things that our accountants wouldn't want to do. And so I ended up kind of finding a home in the corner, dealing with backup and recovery issues and rollback segments back in Oracle 6 was a big problem because you couldn't shrink them. They would all grow to be bigger than the table space would let them be. And so anyway, I know it's a long story, but it was really a lot of stuff that happened. But over the
Mhm.
course of a couple, 3 years, I kind of finally found my legs underneath me as being the install, upgrade, and performance optimization guy. And so I spent about 30 weeks a year, maybe a few more than that, maybe 40, um, getting on an airplane either Sunday night or Monday morning with a suit on, my briefcase, my Oracle business cards, and I would go meet somebody new that typically there were in those days, it was very typical that the people I met would be pissed. They'd be very angry.
Because the
And
system wasn't working or something.
yeah, well,
Hmm.
in a lot of cases, there were a lot of, it's just hard to have that much new stuff in your technology stack, right?
Hmm.
We're running Dynix and, young operating systems, and we're running Oracle on top of that. And that's a young database. And then we've got these applications that are really, like future reaching, but also very young. So there's
Hmm.
bugs everywhere. And then we had what I would politely characterize as a salesperson versus reality issue of reality and what the salespeople were saying were not necessarily always in sync. And so there were just a lot of problems. And so I'd wander into places Monday morning with my briefcase and my red business card and I would just basically listen to people vent. They would do their they knew it wasn't my fault personally, and I was there to help.
Hmm.
But they explained their problems sometimes more violently than others. And then my job was to listen and come up with a plan that they could count on, and then implement steps that make their lives better. And then I'd go
Hmm.
home Friday and water my plants and pay my bills and get back on another airplane the next Sunday night and go to the next place. I rarely went to the same place twice until probably about 1992 or three. And by the way, I joined Oracle in 1989.
Hmm.
Oracle version 6036 or 6027, I think is the first version of Oracle that I really sat down and worked with. And so by 2000, no, 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 sorry, by 1992 or three or so, I'd done enough of this work that I don't, do you remember Robert Shaw and Ray Lane? They came over from, I think it was McKinsey.
Ray
And
rings a bell, but
Ray
both
was
be
the
obviously way before my time.
Ray was the chief operating officer of Oracle for Larry for several years, and Robert Shaw was senior vice president of consulting. And we grew the consulting group from 100 million to a billion to $10 billion in about 4 years. It was
Wow.
an exciting time, and I was kind of in early, and I got to train a lot of people. The weeks that I wasn't on an airplane going to a customer site, I was probably on an airplane going to some Oracle office to train 20 people so they could do the same things that I was learning how to do. In 1990, I want to say two or maybe one, I created this configuration standard called the optimal flexible architecture. That
Hmm.
was it's kind of its own blog post podcast story about that by itself. But
Okay.
basically, I created it because I went on vacation and I didn't want the people in the Dallas office. I didn't want the pre-sales guys in the Dallas office to like reconfigure the demo machine because I'd configured it nicely so I could find everything and back everything up. And, a lot of the clients that I went to, their problem might be something like, yeah, our database went down. Nobody knows why. And then I'd get in and figure out, well, somebody deleted one of your temp files. And they're like, well, yeah, the temp file was in the /tmp directory. And so some nightly cron job deleted it. And I'm like, no, an Oracle temp file is not like a Unix TMP temp file. It's a different kind of a thing. It's a table space called a temporary table space. And what you think of as a temp file is a data file for this. So anyway, everywhere I went, I had to explain it. Like, what are the pieces and where are they? And like, how do I go find the control files? Where in the file system are they? And it's much like you and I talking before the podcast started that you need to know the names of things. You need to have the schema in your head of, what parts are subparts of other parts and how
Yeah.
many layers are there in the hierarchy of files and data files and table spaces and those kinds of things. And most people that installed Oracle in those days didn't know those things. And they
Hmm.
would do things like they would put all of their database table spaces in one on one disk. It's like so they would know where all the Oracle stuff
Ah,
was. but then they would
So
have a
see,
hard
like
time.
I was trained, sorry to interrupt, but I was trained in the early days that index table space and data table space go into different disks, or even like that indexes and data and tables go into different table spaces. Nobody
Yeah.
could ever tell me why.
Well,
It's just
I
happened to be that way.
oh no, because I wrote why. I'm the one
Oh, okay.
that created that advice, and a lot of people interpret it like, oh well, an IO to the index is almost always quickly followed by an IO to the table, so you want them on different devices. And I'm like, yeah, I mean that may be a legitimate reason, but another really good reason to keep your indexes separate from your data is because you may have different backup recovery needs. You may have different IO rates. You may have a ton of things. And the only level in the schema, don't mean it literally, but
Yeah.
the overall schema of the Oracle product, um, the only way to know where everything is, well, I kind of lost my train of thought mid-sentence. But oh, the only way that you can control like the backup and recovery
Mhm.
periodicity for one type of file or another is to put it in a different table space. So
Ah,
it
I see, yeah.
didn't really hurt anything to put them in different table spaces.
Mhm.
And there might be seven different reasons you might want them in separate table spaces. But you might want to load balance them. You might want, who knows? There were four or five reasons, and I
Mhm.
documented them in this paper that you can still find called the Optimal Flexible Architecture. But it ended up getting integrated into the installer for the database. So
Ah,
literally
okay.
for like 2 decades, my installation standard became the standard for all installations of Oracle until the cloud came along. So anyway, I kind of, was fortunate because I got to see probably more customers with problems than any other consultant who did similar things to what I did. And I kind of envied him sometimes, to be able to actually make a suggestion and then be there next week to see if that suggestion actually worked. Um, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but some stability, I kind of envied that, but
Mhm.
also appreciated that I got to see more problems than anybody else. So I got to learn faster than most other people. Um, so anyway, I probably the punchline to that story is over and over, I would go to customer sites. And by the way, I'm going to plug a book. Um, yours should get there by tomorrow. I noticed it's in Milpitas now. So
Oh, thank you.
your copy should be at your house tomorrow. Um, but as I explained in the first chapter of that book, um, the places that I went, they were calling because they had problems. The performance problems were
Mhm.
people were having a problem. Like for example, they weren't able to print invoices quickly enough. The invoice printer for some reason took 8 hours instead of 8 minutes. And they would come to Oracle not with we have an IO problem or CP problem. We have an invoicing problem. We
Mhm.
can't print invoices fast enough, and that's causing us not to be able to get our receivables in fast enough to make payroll, which is causing us to have to borrow money.
Mhm.
So,
Real
blankety
impact
blank,
there,
get
actually,
your ass,
wasn't there?
yeah, get your ass out here now and fix this because it's killing our business.
Mhm.
And then I I learned over again a lot of years of doing this kind of thing that the entry point, the index into the performance problem is not some screen, it's a person. And I don't want to see what the machine's doing while it's printing invoices. I want to see what the invoicing code path is doing while it's printing
Mhm.
invoices. And if it's kind of like you may be familiar with a book written by a gentleman named Eli Goldratt called The Goal. It's a book
No, I don't
about
think so.
optimizing manufacturing plants.
Mhm.
And if you just change the nouns, so instead of lathe and mill and paint sprayer, you've got rollback segments and CPU and disk.
Mhm.
It's very analogous to what I had learned what to do, which is I want to go in and I don't want to measure the utilization of the lathe and go, okay, well, it's highly utilized, so that's good. How about the paint sprayer? I want to lie on the conveyor belt next to the part and I want to find out what's the part doing. And sometimes the part's sitting in inventory for 8 weeks and nobody wants to buy it. And you start thinking, well, manufacturing plant building inventory is not healthy, right? We
Mhm.
want inventory leaving the plant, not coming into the plant. And so the same kind of thing with people's experiences with the database is to lie on the conveyor belt. And eventually learned that by tracing, by using the event 10,046 tracing feature of the Oracle database, I could actually see the code path for the invoice process. And I could see, oh my gosh, it's running fine until all of a sudden, and who knows, maybe it's a lock, maybe it's an IO that takes 19 seconds to do a single block
Mhm.
read. Maybe it's a log file sync event that's waiting for some other process to write to disk before this one can move on. So, I mean, it was always a
Mhm.
surprise to see where the time was going. And the phenomenon that was biting everybody else was that printing invoices may have been only like 1% of the total workload on the system. So if you look at StatsPack or even AWR and Ash and all
Mhm.
that data, the any kind of a problem with printing invoices may not be big enough to register
To
on the
show.
instance-wide
Mm.
scale. So it's like, yeah, we got a few locks, but a few locks are normal. That's fine. Yeah, we got a few file opens, but a few file opens are fine. That's normal. But the invoice guys may be, listen, dude, this is like costing us 2 hours and we're having to borrow money.
Mhm.
So this kind of bore, I'm going to go back in time, this book, which is all tattered up and everything. And this is a book that Jeff Holtz and I wrote shortly after leaving Oracle in 1999 to kind of explain this method that we had discovered of, listen, if Nancy's having a problem with payroll, then we need to be looking at Nancy's executions of payroll, not the
Mhm.
whole system, and trying to infer details from an aggregate. Right. So tracing was kind of cool because it gives us this ability to see unfiltered, unaggregated data that we can filter and re-aggregate any way we want. And that's really what I've done since 1999. Up before 99, it was work for Oracle and go a lot of places. And I don't want to say burned out, but I did, I did get to where I was traveling so much. I thought, you know what? I've got, in 1997, my wife and I had a first child.
Mhm.
1999, we had her second child. And I'm like, look, I want to be home and, see
Yeah.
these guys and play baseball with them and all that. Also had wanted to run a business ever since I went and got my MBA. And I thought, well, now's probably the right time to do that. And I had something that I wanted to invent, right? I wanted to go create a method that was teachable and repeatable, that we could write tools to automate the tedious parts of. And I thought, yeah, that could be a business. And so we formed a company called Hotsos back in
Mhm.
1999. And I think most people remember it for the really great events we used to host because we had an event every year called the Hot Sauce Symposium, and we would have Lex DeHaan and Maria Colgan and
Mhm.
you know Donnell Potter and Jonathan Lewis and all the people that you named at the beginning of the talk. They would
Mhm.
come and present, and we'd spend time together, and then
What does
yada
sauce
yada.
actually stand for, by the way? Because the way it's pronounced to some non-English speaker, it almost sounds like hot sauce rather than SOS.
We So you've got to like transport your mind back to 1999 and think,
Okay.
what were people calling companies back then? And they were calling companies things like Yahoo and Splendify and just made up stuff. And
Okay.
it was kind of a joke that I told a lot. One of the things I did in Oracle, I kept being asked to help grow this group of performance people to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And I told
Hmm.
you how fast consulting grew. Well, my groups were, I think I was given a group in 1993, like 3 or 4 people. And we grew ultimately to about 100 people before I left Oracle.
Hmm.
And we would do telephone interviews and email type screening things. This is before the web.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the infancy of the web. It's not
Right
before.
there.
But we would, at Oracle, we would hire, recruiters and stuff, and they would bring people to us, and some of them would pass the filter, and we would invite them to some place where we would interview them, in groups. And whenever we'd hire people, we would ask, hey, what does everybody want to go do for dinner? And it seemed like everybody would go, let's go find a really hot curry, a really hot Indian place or hot Thai place or hot Mexican place. And I used to tell the joke, we spend all this money. It was a couple $1,000s per head interviewing people. And I said, really, all we need to do is just ask them over the phone what they'd like for dinner tonight. And if they say something hot, then they're hired. Right? It'd save a bunch of money. And so that was a joke while I was at Oracle that I used to tell.
Hmm.
And the gentleman that I partnered with to create Hot Sauce, he and I were thinking about, well, what do we call the business? And we kind of got stuck. And he said, why don't we just call the damn thing Hot Sauce? Like your joke. I'm like, well, that's a stupid name. I work for Hot Sauce. I can't get used to saying that. He's like, no, we'll spell it funny. It'll turn into something with meaning over time, which it did.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And I kind of regretted because a lot of people thought it was hot SOS. It's like your SOS, 911 destination for somebody to come out and fix your problem real quick. And I didn't want to really be known for that more than being known for creating a process that helps you stay out of trouble, right? Instead of going and
Hmm.
being a fireman every place, I wanted to be the fire sprinkler installer person to keep you from
Right.
having fire. But anyway, that's where the name came from, is just a goofy kind of inside joke.
Definitely also thought it was hot SOS. But
I
yeah, so what
gotta,
did you then do? So you got the company and then you did consulting for these performance like performance
yeah.
problem prevention, or how would you even call that?
Well, we started the company in 1999. The two of us and a guy that I still work with. He's at Oracle now with me, Jeff Holt.
Hmm.
And we grew from three people over the course of about 8 years to 45, I think we had at our peak. And we did three things for a living. We called it the three-legged stool. We had education services where we taught people how to measure and manage performance. Then
Hmm.
we had consulting services for people that took the class but didn't want to do all the work. And then we had a product leg of our stool that it's a really cool, you know what the recycle logo looks like on the bottom of a
Hmm.
cup? It's the
Yeah,
three
the Method
arrows
R product, right?
in the circle. Well, we kind of had the same, people would rotate through the three legs of our stool.
Hmm.
They might need help with consulting and then watch us use our tool and go, hey, can we just buy the tool ourselves? And well, yes.
Hmm.
And then they would need training. Well, people might
Right.
start with the training and go, well, that's a pretty cool tool, but I need consulting to help. And it seemed like no matter where people entered the rotary, they would visit all three legs of the stool. And it was a really good business. One year, I believe we sold $5 million worth of product. And the product we had started off as kind of like tkprof. You know, if you drew a picture of a box and said trace comes in and better stuff comes out, well, that's tkprof. And that was also our what we called the hot sauce profiler at the time. Um, Over the years, and gosh, it's a long story, but there was a bad breakup in 2008. I took a bunch of engineers and split off into the Method R company, and hot sauce continued to run for a while.
Hmm.
Um, and Method R turned this hot sauce profiler into a much bigger thing. And what we have now, we call it the Method R workbench.
Okay.
And it's kind of semi-present tense, semi-past tense because I'm not working on it daily anymore because it's not something that Oracle's interested in me working on right now. But it's still available for people to download and use. It's just I don't support it. I can't guarantee it's not going to stop working with 23.8 or whatever.
Hmm.
But it's a it's software now where we can ingest thousands of trace files at once and go find interesting events that occurred. So like
Okay.
we might do a full database trace of a system and go in and find the invoicing part, right? And extract that, much like in Photoshop, you can crop a photo so you get rid of all the stuff in the background you don't care
Hmm.
about. We can do a similar kind of thing. Um, we we've been able to solve problems with database-wide tracing that have been really interesting. We had one situation where a company's nightly batches got longer and longer and longer until they were impeding upon the morning's shop open schedule,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
You need to be done by 6 a.m. so you can open at 8, but these things were
Yeah.
like running until 9 or 9:30, and the company was having to pay cash to its customers because they were breaking their SLAs. And they had an interesting diagnostic tool that they'd created for themselves in-house. They created a Gantt chart that showed where some of their batch jobs were spending time. And I thought, hey, your nightly batch, we've got all the data in our trace tools, because we know for every trace file, when does the work it represents begin and when does the work it represents end? And we can make a Gantt chart out of that, sort things the right way. And in Excel, it only took about 15 minutes to Google enough to figure out how to make a Gantt chart out of the start and stop time data that we had. And
Mhm.
what we found was there were places where the database was idle and nothing was happening. We're like, why is everything gated on this, 30-second period of time when the database is not being asked to do anything? What's going on there? And it's real easy to go, well, the end of the trace file that's here, the trace file is aura 1234.trc, and the trace file that contains the beginning statement after the break is aura 14588.trc. So what's the first thing it did and the last thing that did? And we had the SQL now. And then we said,
Mhm.
hey, does anybody know what happens between when this SQL runs and that SQL runs? And a guy in the back went, oh, I know exactly what that is. He said, let me go look at it. It's something I was going to look at, but it was like 30th on my list of things to check. And he comes back to the call the next hour and he's like, yeah, it was a caching thing in the app. And
Ah,
it was a
okay.
real simple problem to solve. I had no idea. It was some SAP app that was running. But he's like, yeah, it was really easy to fix. I just didn't know it was important. But it was why the nightly batch was stretching, because they had all these places in time where the database wasn't doing anything. And it was real easy
Mhm.
with our tools to show a picture, literally a picture of where that time was being wasted. So there've been so many occurrences of things like that that have happened that I do feel like what we set out to accomplish when we first wrote this and
Mhm.
turn the more tedious pieces of work you used to have to do by hand, we turned those as many of those as we could into code. And so we ended up with something that we've had some pretty interesting results from.
Okay. Cool. What does R mean in the method R?
Well, it came from this book, and I think I have a tab for it. But the book talks about the conventional method where you just sort of get an idea, you try something, you make a change. If it feels better, you keep the change. If it feels worse, you roll it back. And
Mhm.
it's kind of, we called it method C, like in a math book, algorithm
Ah,
F.
okay, okay.
And
Yeah.
so it's method C for conventional. And then a few pages later, we said, here's the algorithm we propose. It's a method completely based on response time. We'll call it method R. And so it's in here just as the label for an algorithm. And it turned out as we taught more and more from this book, I kind of figured out, what method R has kind of become its own brand name
Mhm.
because a lot of people recognize it. And I thought, well, that's what we should name the company.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
so that the company that I represent has been called Method R since the year 2008.
Mhm.
It would be old enough to drive.
Indeed. Oh, fantastic. And then recently you came back to Oracle. I think you had one other, were you at another company in between? I forgot.
There was kind of a
Um,
jumble of partnerships that were
mhm,
that were I've had some of the, I don't want to use the word weird to sound bad, but I've had some of the strangest employment agreements ever, and they were all wonderful in favor of me. But in 2000, I'll get the date wrong, but roughly 2013, um, I just got kind of too nervous about how much money I was having to borrow to run Method R.
mhm,
We had two or three big contracts. We had a university up in the Northeast. We had a phone, computer, and software manufacturer based in Cupertino, California. I'll
mhm,
leave that to your imagination who that might be. They were a big client, and we had another big client who makes routers and switches out of Atlanta. Um, and all three of those projects were really good for us, and they were huge. They were multi-year,
mhm.
and they were all coming to their natural conclusion within about 3 months of each other. And I started thinking, I don't think I can replace these projects. I'm not sure we'll survive unless I do something innovative. And so I got in touch with my friend Carrie Osborne,
Mhm.
who ran at the time a company called Enkatech. And he said, hey, I've got an idea for you. But I can't tell you about it until I get some approvals. And then he went and talked to his boss. and told me, yeah, we're going to be acquired by Accenture this quarter.
Mhm.
And I wanted to talk to them about whether they'd be cool with me hiring you and your team. And they're like delighted because, it sounds really good. There are people that are going to be afraid of getting absorbed into this big conglomerate, but we've got these guys that apparently some people think are cool that are going to be
Mhm.
joining us. So maybe it's worth hanging out. And it helped us both. So we were employees of Accenture for a while, and I had an employment agreement that let us do full tilt business, method our business. So we spent a lot of time actually writing and new features and things, and it was a good
Mhm.
time. There's another book, um, big fat book about trace data that I did a lot of this while I was on the Encatech team within Accenture. That kind of lasted 2 or 3 years, and then we got an offer to go join a company called Sintra, which
Mhm.
sounds so familiar to Accenture that my mom couldn't tell the difference between Sintra and Accenture unless I slowed it way down. Fair enough. But we joined them and stayed there for about 3 or 4 years until COVID kind of ripped through
Mhm.
us. But we've had these really good partnerships where Sintra especially resold our product. And they had a really nice kind of a business model that we fit into.
Mhm.
And then that ended with COVID, and then Jeff and I became Method R by ourselves, and we hung out, we survived, but we wanted to flourish. And really, I guess it was 2023 October when I started thinking, the reasons I left Oracle, I had baby kids, don't have baby kids
Mhm.
anymore. They're all flown the
They're
coop.
gone. Yeah.
I had something I wanted to invent, which I did. I invented exactly what I wanted to invent. Mission accomplished.
Mhm.
Um, and then third, I'd pretty much run all the businesses that I wanted to run by then. And I thought, it's the original reasons don't hold anymore. So let's think about what I should do instead. And it just I thought about 2 or 3 different places and actually
Mhm.
took some steps, did some interviewing and snooping around. And everywhere I went, I just had this weird feeling in my stomach that I couldn't get rid of. It's like I'm nervous. I'd be nervous to go there.
Mhm. Okay.
And I thought, you know what? I need to call Juan because Juan Luis has been not a close personal friend, but a friendly acquaintance for a really long time. I mean, he and I, would walk across the room, I think, to say hi to each other. And
Mhm.
and I called Juan and I said, would it be crazy to consider, me coming back and my colleague Jeff? I don't want to abandon him. And that started the process that ultimately ended up with me working for Jenny with you guys. And I honestly, it's way better than I anticipated. But when I talked to him and I started thinking about going back to Oracle, that thing in my stomach just wasn't there. It was like, yes, I
Yeah.
would, I would, I would love to go back there. I feel like I know the place. I'm still friends with everybody. I just, I didn't know how good it would be because back in the 90s, there was a lot of internal cutthroat type stuff, and there
Mhm.
were people that didn't do their jobs very well. There were people that were angry and belligerent, and I swear, man, I haven't seen anybody in this tour, and I've been here now 5 months. Everybody's just so kind and peaceful and get stuff done, and like it's just amazing. And in fact, um, quite intimidating to be honest, because the people around me are so much faster and better at what I want to be faster and better at. I've spent all these years focusing in on one very narrow part of Oracle, specifically trace data and performance problems and things. And I think I have a fair knowledge of kind of the big picture and all, but nothing like what I've gotten in the last 5 months. And one of the first things that Jenny engaged me in was this program called The Collective that Kay Malcolm's
Mhm.
group is running that is basically the construction of collateral for sales and pre-sales people to take new features out to market. And I've
Mhm.
been a participant in writing for that project. And the research I have to do good writing is causing me to fill in my the gaps in my knowledge because I didn't know what vector anything was a year ago. I didn't know JSON relational duality, and I still wouldn't if I hadn't joined Oracle.
Mhm. Well,
So
to be
it's
fair,
really
those are
cool.
both new features, so you're certainly not the only one.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess my point is, even now, I still wouldn't know about them if I had continued my trajectory before coming to Oracle.
Mm.
So it's fun. And I remember from the 90s occasionally looking at the stock price and going, "Oh, I'm participating in that." And it's,
Yeah.
you don't get that when you run your own little company. So it's you know, people think, well, can you work for a little can you work for yourself for that long and still be able to work for somebody? And I was a
Mhm.
little worried about that, but Jenny, God, she's so talented at leading the people that work for her. And I feel really blessed that I got into her group because she's really, really good at keeping me like busy and not feeling too bad about when I feel behind. She's got good pep talks for me. And anyway, I couldn't be more pleased to be where I am.
Oh, great. No, we're definitely happy to have you back. Or for me, as a fairly young person, only joined in 2012, to have you. Before we let you go, I got two questions for you. One trivia question and another question. Well, let's do the other way around. Question number one. If somebody wants to get started with performance tuning or performance diagnostic for Oracle database, like get into the performance sector, let's say, or a topic, where would you recommend they start?
I have a I have a technical answer and a political answer.
All
Uh,
right.
and this may be worthy of another 30 minutes later. Uh, the politically correct answer is to learn all about Ash and AWR and to learn what the events mean. What's the difference
Hmm.
between DB file sequential read and DB file scattered read and direct path write, and what do all those mean? Um, and that knowledge will actually apply to either of the two answers I'm going to give right now. But the
Hmm.
politically correct answer is, learn all about active session history and, all the OEM stuff
Hmm.
and as much about Ash and AWR as you can. That's the politically correct answer. The answer that's really in my heart has to do with the books that I just flashed you, because with trace data, I believe it is an easier, more deterministic process by which you can go and figure out why are things taking the time they take.
Hmm.
Now, if you just are trying to make a machine consume less CPU, then sure, go write a query against $SQL and find out what SQL statement is taking the most, current mode reads and consistent mode reads and doing the most physical read call, to the operating system.
Hmm.
Um, but if you want to make it so that Nancy's payroll process or that invoice process or that nightly batch job go faster, then I do not recommend looking at system-wide metrics as your point of entry. And it's because looking at those tools tends to give you cognitive bias about what information to go collect.
Hmm.
Um, I think I mentioned it the other day in a meeting that you were in, but I'm going to be presenting to the these guys have a conference called P99 Conf.
Hmm.
It's like 20,000 people that are all different. It's not an Oracle focused thing, it's a performance focused thing. And I've got a talk there where I go through an example of why looking at the wrong data first created a cognitive barrier to like getting the right data. It caused people to have hypotheses they couldn't let go of.
Hmm.
But looking at the data a different way, and when I say a different way, I'm talking about primarily that guy. This
Hmm.
explains it in with some Oracle examples, but it's not a book about Oracle. And so I guess my recommendation would be to read that and study both perspectives of the statistics that Oracle gives you and the events, the 10,046 stuff, the DB file sequential reads and all those things. You're going to have to learn those either way.
Okay, great. Trivia question for you before we wrap up. Do you know what the TK and tkprof actually stands for?
I I hope I do, but it's going to be embarrassing if I'm wrong. I think the T stands for test and the K stands for kernel.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, test
Excellent.
kernel. Yeah. I've heard rumors out there that some people have thought it stands for Tom Kite, which would be quite an endorsement, obviously,
I,
but it's
I,
actually just test kernel. Yeah.
good. I think I've told that joke before, the Tom Kite one. Now, that's a good tool, but we back in the 90s started discovering that there's a lot of data in a trace file that
Mhm.
tkprof didn't really harvest.
So be careful what you say now because your friend Juan Loiza wrote that tool, if you
Well, I know
didn't
that
know
Juan
that.
wrote it, and another friend, Graham Wood, did some of the maintenance on it because
Yeah.
back in nine, I guess it was, a lot changed.
Mm.
In 10, I think it's when they changed the P1, P2, P3 names to like longer names that have spaces in them and pound signs and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I'm aware that some of my opinions about the methodology of performance
Mhm.
collide with people that I have a lot of respect and affection for. You know, a lot of really good friends.
All right. Well, thank you so much, folks, for tuning in. Thank you so much, Carrie, for being on the show. It was an absolute pleasure. And we see you all next time.
Thank you.